Part 1. The wind howled through the abandoned cemetery on the outskirts of the city, carrying with it the sharp scent of rain and cold earth. The iron gates, bent and rusted with age, creaked each time the wind pushed against them. Most people believed the place was cursed. Teenagers dared each other to approach it, but none stayed long after sunset. No one came here willingly. No one except Alina. She was 12 years old, though hunger and hardship made her look younger. Her oversized sweater hung loosely over her thin frame, sleeves covering her hands to protect them from the cold. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves around a face that had forgotten what childhood felt like. The cemetery had not always been her shelter. Once, she had lived in a small apartment with yellow curtains and a mother who sang while cooking soup. Once, she had known warmth. But a fire had taken that life in a single, merciless night. Since then, the world had turned sharp and unforgiving. The cemetery, strangely, was kinder than the streets. No one chased her away here. No one shouted at her to move. The dead were quiet neighbors. That night, the air felt heavier than usual. Thick clouds swallowed the moon, and thunder rolled distantly across the sky. Alina lay curled inside a crumbling marble mausoleum near the back of the grounds. One of the stone panels had fallen years ago, leaving just enough space for her to slip inside unnoticed. She wrapped herself in a thin blanket she had found near a dumpster days earlier. Her stomach ached from hunger, but she was used to ignoring it. Hunger was a steady companion. It did not scare her anymore. Sleep, however, would not come. The wind was restless. The trees whispered. Something felt wrong. Then she heard it. A dull thud. Her eyes snapped open. She held her breath. Another thud followed, heavier this time, like wood striking wood. She sat up slowly, her heart beating faster. It wasn't the wind. The sound came again, rhythmic. Desperate. Thud, thud, thud. Alina crawled toward the broken opening of the mausoleum and peered outside. The rain had started, light but steady. Shadows stretched long between the crooked gravestones. For a moment she wondered if she had imagined it. The cemetery had strange sounds at night, animals, shifting earth, old branches falling. Then she heard it, a muffled voice. Help. The word was faint, as if buried beneath layers of cloth, or earth. Her blood ran cold. She scanned the rows of graves until she noticed something unusual. Near the far corner, close to the old oak tree, the soil looked freshly disturbed. The mound was uneven, darker than the surrounding ground. And the sound was coming from there. Her first instinct was to run. Every story she had ever heard about cemeteries rushed through her mind. Ghosts, spirits, curses. But the voice came again, cracked, strained, unmistakably human. Please. Fear battled with something stronger inside her. If someone was alive down there. She was already running before her thoughts could stop her. Her shoes sank into wet soil as she reached the grave. It was newly dug. The wooden cross at the head bore no name. No flowers. No dates. Just blank wood. Another thud shook the ground beneath her knees. Can you hear me? She shouted, pressing her ear to the dirt. Yes. The voice cried weakly. Please. I'm alive. Her hands began to tremble. How could someone be buried alive? There was no time to think. She dropped to her knees and started digging with her bare hands. The soil was heavy and soaked from the rain. It clung to her fingers, packed beneath her nails, filled her sleeves. She scooped and threw it aside as fast as she could, ignoring the sharp stones cutting into her skin. I'm digging, she shouted. Don't stop talking. I can't breathe, the voice rasped from below. Hurry. Panic surged through her. She dug faster, her small arms straining against the weight of the earth. Dirt flew in frantic waves behind her. Her fingers burned, but she did not stop. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. Time blurred. Her nails cracked. Blood mixed with mud. Finally, her hand struck something solid. Wood. She cleared more soil until the outline of a coffin emerged beneath the dirt. Her breath caught in her throat. Hold on, she cried. From inside, frantic banging answered her. She scrambled to her feet and looked around wildly. She needed something, anything, to pry the lid open. Her gaze landed on a rusted metal rod leaning against the cemetery fence. She sprinted toward it, nearly slipping in the mud, and dragged it back to the grave. The coffin was still half buried. She dug just enough space along one edge and wedged the metal rod into a narrow crack between the lid and the side panel. She pushed. Nothing. The rod slipped. Inside, the banging grew weaker. Please, the voice gasped. Tears blurred her vision. Don't give up, she shouted back, though fear clawed at her chest. She repositioned the rod, braced her muddy shoes against the wet ground, and threw her entire weight into it. The wood creaked. She pushed harder. The lid cracked slightly, but the soil pressing down made it nearly impossible to lift. Alina looked at her bleeding hands. She was just a child. But down there, someone was suffocating. She screamed, not in fear, but in frustration, and began clawing away more dirt from the top and sides of the coffin. The rain poured harder now, turning the grave into thick sludge. Her arms shook from exhaustion. Her breath came in ragged bursts. The banging inside slowed. No, she cried. Stay awake. Silence answered her for a terrifying second. Then a faint knock. Relief surged through her like fire. She shoved the rod deeper into the crack and pushed again with everything she had. The wood splintered. A thin line opened across the lid. Air rushed inside. Suddenly, a pale hand burst through the broken wood, fingers clawing desperately toward the surface. Alina stumbled back in shock but quickly grabbed the hand. It's okay, she gasped. I've got you. She pulled while the man inside pushed upward with the last of his strength. With a final cracking sound, the lid gave way completely. The man's head emerged from the coffin, his face ghostly white, eyes wide with terror. He gulped air in desperate, choking breaths. Mud covered his expensive suit, his hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. He dragged himself halfway out before collapsing beside the grave, coughing violently. Alina dropped the metal rod and crawled beside him. Breathe, she whispered, though she had no idea how to help. You're out, you're out. The man rolled onto his back, staring at the storm-dark sky. Rain fell onto his face, mixing with tears he didn't seem to realize were there. For long moments, neither of them spoke. He was alive. He turned his head slowly toward her, blinking as if unsure she was real. You, he whispered hoarsely. You dug me out. She nodded, suddenly aware of how small she must look, covered in mud, hands bleeding, clothes torn. You heard me? He asked. Yes. His breathing steadied gradually, though his body still trembled. They drugged me, he murmured. I couldn't move. I heard everything, the coffin closing, the dirt. His voice broke. Alina shivered, not from the cold, but from imagining it. Who did it? She asked softly. Before he could answer, bright headlights suddenly pierced through the cemetery gates. Engines roared, multiple vehicles. The man's eyes widened, with instant recognition, and fear. No, he whispered. Doors slammed in the distance. Voices echoed through the rain. Spread out. Check the grave. The man grabbed Alina's wrist with surprising strength. They're back, he said urgently. Her heart pounded. Who? The ones who buried me. Flashlights cut through the darkness, sweeping over tombstones like searching blades. Alina didn't hesitate. Come, she whispered. She pulled him toward the broken mausoleum, guiding him through narrow paths between graves only she knew. His steps were unsteady, but adrenaline pushed him forward. They slipped behind the crumbling structure and into a tight stone passage barely visible from the outside. It was a place she used to hide from bullies who sometimes wandered in. They pressed themselves into the shadows just as heavy boots approached the grave. What the? It's open. He's not here. Flashlights scanned the ground, illuminating the torn coffin, the scattered dirt, the blood on the soil. Alina squeezed her eyes shut. If they looked just a few feet to the right, the beam passed dangerously close to the mausoleum entrance. The man's breathing was loud beside her. She pressed her hand over his mouth gently. Quiet, she whispered. Footsteps drew nearer. One more step and they would see them. Alina's heart felt like it would burst from her chest. And in that moment, hiding in the shadows of the dead, she realized something terrifying. Saving him might have been the easy part. Now they both had to survive. Part 2. The footsteps stopped just beyond the cracked entrance of the mausoleum. Alina could see their shadows stretching long across the wet ground. Flashlight beams sliced through the rain, moving slowly, methodically. Check everywhere, one of the men ordered. His voice was cold, controlled. He couldn't have gone far. The man beside her, Victor, though she did not yet know his name, trembled. His body was still weak from whatever they had given him. She could feel it in the way his weight leaned against the stone wall. If he collapsed now, they would hear. Alina tightened her grip on his arm. Breathe slowly, she whispered. The beam of light moved closer. One of the men stepped toward the mausoleum entrance, boots crunching on gravel. He paused, raising the flashlight higher. Alina's pulse roared in her ears. Please don't come in, please. The man leaned slightly forward, shining the light across the broken marble floor, but the rain and darkness worked in their favor. The back passage where Alina hid was narrow and shadowed, concealed by fallen stone slabs. Nothing here, the man muttered. Keep moving, the leader barked. The footsteps retreated. They waited. 5 seconds. 10. 30. The search dragged on for nearly an hour. The men tore through bushes, checked behind statues, even circled the perimeter fence. At one point, they returned to the open grave, shouting angrily at the sight of the shattered coffin. How did a half-dead man get out alone? One growled. He didn't, another answered. Someone helped him. Alina felt Victor stiffen beside her. They're looking for you two now, he whispered faintly. She didn't respond. Fear had already settled in her stomach like a stone. Finally, frustration overtook the men. We'll find him, the leader snapped. He can't hide forever. Car doors slammed, engines roared, the headlights faded into the distance. Silence returned to the cemetery, thick, heavy, broken only by the sound of rain. Alina didn't move at first. She had learned on the streets that silence could lie. She counted slowly in her head to 100. When no sound returned, she finally exhaled. They're gone, she whispered. Victor slid down the wall. Exhaustion overtaking him. His skin looked pale under the faint dawn light creeping into the sky. You saved my life twice tonight, he murmured. She shrugged, though her arms ached and her hands throbbed. You were still breathing. He studied her for a long moment, as if trying to understand her. What's your name? He asked. Alina. I'm Victor. She nodded, the name meaning nothing to her yet. He tried to stand but staggered. She quickly moved under his arm to support him. He was heavy, but desperation gave her strength. You can't stay here, she said. They might come back. He gave a weak smile. You sound like you've done this before. Hiding, she replied quietly. Yes. She guided him back inside the mausoleum where she slept. The space was cramped but dry. She handed him her only blanket. You'll freeze, he protested. I don't, she said simply. He wrapped the blanket around himself anyway, his eyes never leaving her small, bleeding hands. You're hurt. It's nothing. But when he gently took her hands, he saw the torn skin, the cracked nails filled with dirt and blood. His expression darkened, not with anger at her, but at the world. No child should have to dig someone out of a grave. No one else was there, she answered. Dawn slowly painted the sky gray. As light filtered into the cemetery, Victor reached into his soaked coat with trembling fingers and pulled out a leather wallet. Miraculously, it had stayed dry inside his inner pocket. He opened it, revealing identification, cards, and a small photograph of himself. Alina's eyes widened slightly. Even she recognized the face. She had seen it on billboards near the highway. On business magazines people threw away. On the side of tall glass buildings downtown. Viktor Volkov, the millionaire who owned half the city. She looked at him again, disbelief settling in. You're that man, she whispered. He gave a humorless laugh. Yes, I suppose I am. Why would someone bury you alive? Because money makes people greedy, he said quietly. And power makes them cruel. Before she could respond, a faint sound broke the morning air. Sirens. Distant at first, then growing louder. Victor closed his eyes briefly in relief. Good, good, she asked nervously. I have an emergency tracker. It activates if my heart rate drops too low. He looked at her. They must have found it. Within minutes, police vehicles surrounded the cemetery. Officers rushed toward the open grave, weapons drawn. Alina instinctively stepped back into the shadows. It's okay, Victor told her gently. They're not here for us. He raised his hand weakly as officers approached. Shock spread across their faces when they recognized him. Sir, we thought, they tried to kill me, he interrupted calmly. I need protection, now. Paramedics arrived shortly after. They placed an oxygen mask over his face and helped him onto a stretcher. As they lifted him, he grabbed Alina's wrist. Don't disappear, he said firmly. She hesitated. I don't belong with people like you. His gray eyes locked onto hers. You belong anywhere you choose to be. She said nothing as the ambulance doors closed. The vehicles drove away, and once again, the cemetery fell silent. Alina stood alone beside the broken grave. She expected that to be the end. Rich people always left. They forgot. 3 days passed. She continued sleeping in the mausoleum, though she found herself glancing toward the gates more often than usual. She told herself she didn't care. On the 4th morning, a black car rolled slowly through the cemetery gates. Her heart pounded, but it wasn't the same man. This car was sleek, polished. A single driver stepped out, dressed in a formal suit. He looked around uncertainly until his eyes landed on her. Alina, he asked gently. She didn't answer at first. Mr. Volkov would like to see you. She studied his face for signs of deception. She had learned to read people quickly. He seemed sincere. Why? She asked cautiously. He insisted. She hesitated only a moment before stepping forward. The ride to the hospital was quiet. She had never sat in such a comfortable seat before. The city looked different from inside tinted glass. At the hospital, security escorted them through private corridors until they reached a spacious room. Victor stood near the window, no longer pale, no longer weak. A small bandage marked his wrist where IV lines had been. When he saw her, his face softened in a way she hadn't expected. "You came," he said. "You asked," she replied. He dismissed the staff, ensuring they were alone. "I investigated," he began. "It was my business partner. He wanted control of everything. He thought I was dead long enough to transfer authority. And now, he's been arrested." She nodded slowly. He walked to a table and opened a folder filled with documents. "I grew up with nothing," he said quietly. "People ignored me, stepped over me, just like they probably do to you." She didn't deny it. "When I built my company, I promised myself I would never be powerless again. Somewhere along the way, I forgot what it felt like to be small." He looked at her bleeding hands, now bandaged. "You reminded me." He slid the documents toward her. "I've arranged guardianship, a home, school, medical care, everything, if you want it." She stared at the papers but didn't touch them. "And if I don't?" she asked carefully. He smiled gently. "Then I'll still make sure you're safe. But I hope you say yes." Silence stretched between them. Her mind raced. A home, school, warmth, those things felt unreal. "Why would you do this?" she whispered. "Because when I was buried, alone in the dark, it wasn't my money that saved me," he said. "It was you." Her throat tightened. "I didn't know who you were," she said. "That's exactly why it matters." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. For years, she had survived by trusting no one. But this man had looked at her not with pity, but with respect. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped closer. "Okay," she said. Relief washed over his face. From that day forward, her life changed. She moved into a warm home with large windows and soft beds. At first, she couldn't sleep properly, it felt too safe, too quiet. She kept expecting someone to shout at her to leave. But no one did. She began school, struggling at first but quickly catching up. She discovered she loved science, especially learning how the human body worked. "How did you survive being buried?" she once asked Victor. He smiled faintly. "Because you refused to let me die." He, too, changed. The near-death experience stripped away something hardened inside him. He began funding shelters for homeless children, built education programs, created safe housing initiatives. When reporters asked what inspired the sudden shift in his business priorities, he always answered the same way. A girl who wasn't afraid to get her hands dirty. Every year, on the anniversary of that stormy night, they returned to the cemetery, not out of fear, but gratitude. They stood beside the oak tree where a broken grave once lay. And Victor would look at her and say, "You gave me back my life." But what he never said aloud was the deeper truth. She had given him something far more valuable than his fortune. She had given him his humanity. And Alina, the homeless girl who once slept among the dead, finally understood something too. Sometimes the world buries you. But, sometimes, if you're brave enough to dig, you rise.